My name is Rebecca Lane. I'm 39 years old, a commissioned officer in the United States Army, and a military widow. At least that's what I've been told to accept for the past 12 months. On the day that was meant to honor the life of my husband, Captain David Lane, I wore my dress uniform, the one I hadn't touched since the folded flag was handed to me. My boots echoed on the stone floor of the hall where the memorial was held, a clean, somber room inside the Arlington War Memorial Center. The air carried rosemary and varnish and sorrow that wouldn't speak its name. I stepped forward, hand resting on a wreath of white lilies. They'd placed a blank plaque on the easel, no photo, no confirmed body, just a name, Captain David Lane, MIA, presumed KIA. I heard him before I saw him. Stop living in the past. The words came sharp, slicing through the hushed room like shrapnel. I turned slightly. My father stood in the aisle, back straight, voice louder than respect allowed. He wore his polished shoes, navy tie, and that same dismissive look he gave me at David's funeral 12 months ago. "This family can't keep drowning in your grief, Rebecca," he said. "He's gone. Let him go." Every eye turned. My daughter gripped my sleeve. My hands didn't tremble, but my throat closed. I said nothing. Silence is sometimes the loudest resistance. I bent slightly, placing the wreath at the foot of the plaque. I whispered, "Not for him, but for me. I still believe you're out there." Just then, from the rear of the hall, I heard a stir. A nurse wheeled in a young woman, barely 20, thin, with bandages on both wrists, and a stitched-up bruise across her temple. Her uniform sleeves were rolled up, fourth line trailing behind her wheelchair. She looked dazed at first, then locked eyes with me across the crowded room. My breath caught. The room stilled. The girl opened her mouth. Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't spoken in days. But every word landed like a grenade. "Ma'am, your husband is still alive." No one moved. Not even the priest standing by the altar knew what to do. The young woman blinked slowly, like the light hurt her eyes. The nurse pushed her forward until she was right beside the podium, facing me. "I was rescued last week," she said, voice shaking. "We were ambushed. A convoy extraction gone wrong. I thought I was going to die out there." I stepped closer. "Who told you to come here?" Her lips quivered. "Your husband saved me. His name was David Lane. He carried me through mud and fire. He was shot protecting us. But he was alive when they dragged him away." I couldn't breathe. My hands tightened into fists at my sides. Someone in the front row gasped. A lieutenant colonel rose from his seat, walking toward the young woman, then stopped short like he had seen a ghost. "What did you say to him?" I asked her. She looked at me again, her eyes wide. "He told me, 'Tell Rebecca I'm still fighting. Tell her not to stop looking.'" The room erupted. Some people shouted. My cousin dropped her wineglass. A chaplain crossed himself. Officers stood, unsure whether to intervene or salute. Behind me, I heard my father's voice crack. "She's confused," he said sharply. "She's just been through trauma." But I turned. For the first time in a year, I turned and stared him in the eyes. "Is she?" I said quietly. He didn't answer. The girl reached into her pocket and handed me a dog tag. Dirty, scratched, but unmistakable. David's name, David's blood type, still warm from being held. I nearly fell to my knees, but I didn't. I stood tall, because in that moment I knew the truth was crawling its way back to the surface, and someone, somewhere, had tried very hard to bury it. I stared down at the dog tag in my palm. It wasn't new. It had bite marks near the edge, the kind David used to make when he was thinking too hard. It was real, no question. Yet around me, the room began to fracture. Two officers whispered to each other in panic. A woman pulled out her phone and began recording. A man near the exit stormed out, cell pressed to his ear, whispering into the noise. But I stood there, still as stone. I hadn't cried when they declared him missing. I didn't scream when the memorial orders were sent. I didn't beg when my own family said, "Let him go." But now I didn't have to beg anymore. My daughter Maddie came to my side. She was 12, her hand still smaller than mine, but her voice clear. "Is Dad alive?" I knelt. "I don't know yet, baby, but someone's been lying to us." Behind us, I heard a whisper, not from the crowd, from my father. "She's making this up," he said. "This girl, she's just looking for attention." I stood. turned slowly. His face had changed. Not confusion, not grief, fear. I knew that look. My father was never afraid of grief, but he feared exposure. In that moment, I saw it. He wasn't surprised David might be alive. He was surprised someone had said it out loud. My father had always spoken in absolutes. The past is the past. Move forward or get left behind. But now his words came back to haunt him. I walked past him without another word. The young soldier in the wheelchair had tears in her eyes. "You did the right thing," I said to her. "I didn't want to come," she whispered. "But he saved me. He told me you'd understand." I nodded. She added, almost inaudibly, "They're watching me now. Be careful." My stomach turned. I knew what she meant. The past wasn't behind us. It was buried, alive and breathing, under layers of silence, lies, and official signatures. And I had just cracked the ground wide open. The memorial ended in chaos, but what came after was worse. Inside the restricted lounge behind the main hall, meant for family and senior officers, tension vibrated, through the air like a live wire. Maddie sat beside me on a low velvet bench, her eyes fixed on the floor. She hadn't spoken a word since the girl in the wheelchair left. My mother was the first to break the silence. "Rebecca," she said quietly, smoothing her already perfect blouse. "This has gone far enough." I turned my head toward her. Her lips were tight, the kind of tight that comes from a lifetime of pretending everything is fine. "Mom," I said softly, "you saw her. You heard her. She didn't meet my gaze. I heard a girl in shock. I saw a room full of people you humiliated." "Humiliated?" I echoed. Before she could answer, my father stepped forward, fast and forceful. "You're spiraling," he said. "You're letting fantasy take over again. What happened out there? What she said? It's not reliable." My voice stayed calm. "She had his dog tag. He didn't flinch. You think you're the first person who's clung to false hope? You think you're the only one who's ever been lied to?" "No," I said. "But I won't be the next person to stay quiet because it's more convenient." His face darkened. "You're risking everything, your career, your reputation. You're dragging your daughter through this circus." "She deserves the truth," I said. "You don't even know what truth you're chasing," he barked. "You think someone like her, some half-lucid soldier they wheeled in like a prop, can break national protocol? That she'd even be allowed to say something real if it were true?" "Then someone made a mistake," I replied. "Because she did." He threw his hands up. "You're digging your own grave, and you're doing it in uniform." That one stung. My family always measured honor by medals, silence, and compliance. They called it discipline. I called it fear, dressed as tradition. "I'm not digging my grave," I said slowly. "I'm digging for the truth. If someone buried David, I want to know who held the shovel." Maddie looked up at me. That was all the fuel I needed. "You're so sure he's dead," I said to my father, "but I think you're afraid he isn't." Silence. My mother exhaled like someone had struck her in the stomach. "Rebecca, please, let this go. You're scaring me." "Then be scared," I said. "Because if he's alive, someone let me mourn a lie for 12 months. Someone let our daughter cry herself to sleep thinking she had no father. And I intend to find out who." There was a beat. Then another. Finally, my father said, "You start pulling threads. You won't like what unravels." I stood. "I've been stitched into silence for a year. It's time something did unravel." I took Maddie's hand, and in that moment, I didn't care who stood behind me. I was ready to walk through fire to find David, even if the first thing I had to walk through was my own family. I requested a transfer the following week. Officially, it was a quiet move. Major Rebecca Lane returning to her academic roots at the Army War College as a strategy instructor. Unofficially, it was cover, a place where no one asked why I wasn't ready to move on. A desk where no one looked too hard at what else I kept open on my second monitor after hours. By day, I lectured on battlefield misdirection, intelligence operations, and operational deception campaigns. By night, I opened the classified case logs from David's last deployment and started looking for the one thing that doesn't lie: inconsistency. At first, I found what I expected: routine action reports, digital maps, sanitized emails, all clean, too clean. Then I noticed it.
A mission timestamp was off by 10 minutes. Not enough for a civilian to care, but enough to make a difference in a firefight. Enough for someone like me, who used to help coordinate air support, to raise an eyebrow. I double-checked it against the radio logs, those I had to retrieve from a backup server under an academic research request. In the log, there was a transmission marked Red Echo, David's call sign, 13 minutes after the official time of his KIA. It was faint, distorted, but it was there. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I reviewed the recovery report. The body was never recovered whole, just remains believed to be David's, tagged by dog tag and uniform scrap. But that's standard in war zones. What wasn't standard? The report had a missing page. I requested it from archives. They told me there was no missing page.
What you received is the full file, the captain on the other end told me, too quickly. He hung up before I could ask for his name. I pressed harder. I pulled up David's personnel file, expecting to see a freeze date, the day his file was locked after his presumed death. But the freeze was dated 2 weeks after the memorial. That made no sense. And then came the email. One of my colleagues, a young adjunct professor reviewing chain of command routing logs for his doctoral thesis, flagged it. "Ma'am," he said nervously after class, "this was probably just a technical error. But I thought I should show you." The email was from David's commanding officer to Central Command, dated a full day after David's recorded death. It was simple, short, routine on the surface. But the subject line read, "Delta Echo package received." In containment. It was CC'd to a classified node that shouldn't have been active. Delta Echo was a code used for special retrieval. And package never referred to remains. It referred to people. I thanked the professor, tucked the printout into a folder, and locked it in my office drawer. That night, I drove to the edge of base housing, parked under a broken security light, and just sat in the dark for 20 minutes, watching, thinking. If David was alive, someone wanted him not to be found. And if that was true, then someone else in uniform had rewritten reality. And I wasn't just dealing with loss anymore. I was dealing with a cover-up. And I was going to uncover every inch of it, even if it meant destroying the very institution I'd sworn to protect. I was scanning procurement manifests, long, tedious spreadsheets filled with serial numbers, bulk orders, and shipment routes, hoping to trace the misfiled recovery reports. It wasn't exciting, it wasn't even relevant, but it was the only thread I had left after hitting a wall with official records. Most of the vendors were familiar, standard military contractors, state-verified suppliers. Then my eyes caught something that made me sit up. Lane Logistics, Auxiliary Division. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Lane is a common name. But the routing code was Fort Carson, my old station. And the supply run? It was dated exactly 2 days after David's last mission. A chill moved through me. I dug deeper. The listed procurement was a Category Red supply, meant for emergency transport support and containment materials. Not food, not medicine. Containment. That term again. I opened the contractor registration file and entered the company ID into the military vendor database. Owner, Franklin A. Lane, my father. My hands went still on the keyboard. For a full minute, I just stared at the screen. It wasn't a mistake, not a misfiled record, not a name coincidence. My father, retired colonel, now a defense contractor, had quietly attached his company to a classified logistical route, operating adjacent to David's final deployment zone. I clicked into the invoice trail. Lane Logistics had handled 4 shipments under the same routing code in a 2-week window following David's disappearance. All flagged restricted, all signed off by someone inside Central Command. And every time, the contact liaison listed wasn't David's unit. It was a name I hadn't seen before. Crosswell Group 6. That wasn't a division. That was a covert cell. And my father, who'd told me at the memorial to stop living in the past, who'd demanded I let go of David, had been running support routes for the exact kind of op that would never show up on public records. I felt my throat tighten, not with grief, with something sharper. It wasn't just condescension. It wasn't just him thinking I was broken. It was betrayal. He knew something. He had to. I printed the pages and folded them into my field notebook. I didn't confront him right away. I knew better than that. But everything shifted in that moment. Because this wasn't just about a husband who disappeared. This was about family. This was about silence used as currency. And this was about a man who had worn the same uniform I did, who'd raised me to believe in truth and duty, selling both behind a desk while telling me to forget my grief. That night, I sat alone in my quarters and replayed every conversation with my father, since the memorial, the way he looked away when I mentioned David's name, the forced calm in his voice when the wounded soldier spoke, his refusal to even ask who she was. He already knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. Enough to make sure I wouldn't find what I was looking for, unless I stopped being his daughter and started being a soldier again, one willing to take the next step. Even if it meant going to war with her own blood. The hardest part wasn't the late nights or the buried files. It was remembering David's way of thinking, how he coded his truth between the lines. I pulled out his old field laptop, the one returned to me months after his presumed death. At the time, I hadn't touched it. It felt like desecration, like opening a coffin. But now I needed answers more than I needed closure. The device was military issued, hardened against tampering. I had clearance, but even so, it took me hours to get past the dual encryption. David had locked it down in a way I'd never seen before. 2 layers of biometric verification, plus a randomized key sequence based on his deployment coordinates. It was overkill, unless you were trying to hide something big. Once inside, the desktop was nearly clean. No emails, no open reports, just a folder labeled Inventory Logs, Quarter 4. I opened it. Dozens of spreadsheets loaded up. Every one of them looked like routine manifests, medical aid, ammo shipments, evac orders. But David had worked in counter-threat intelligence. He didn't do logistics. I scanned each file and noticed a pattern. In the final columns of each spreadsheet, he had quietly embedded a single character, sometimes a period, sometimes a comma, sometimes a hyphen. Useless if you were just reading numbers, but if you extracted them all in sequence, it spelled a file name. Echo 1 last dot MP4. It was buried under a hidden partition. A video. My heart punched against my chest as I clicked play. There he was, David, unshaven, dust on his uniform, a shallow cut on his right cheekbone. The room behind him looked like a makeshift bunker. Cinder block walls, no windows. He stared into the camera, jaw tight, voice steady. If someone's watching this, I might be dead, or captured, or running, but if I'm still alive, I'm not stopping. He glanced off camera briefly, then back. They think if they bury it under classified long enough, no one will care, but it's not just intel. It's lives. It's our own people. He took a breath. There's a corridor between ops in Region 9B and Fort Halston. It's unofficial, unauthorized. But cargo moves through it. No manifests. No oversight. I tracked it through auxiliary vendor contracts. They're running black sites under domestic cover. My blood ran cold. I don't know who's protecting it, but if you're seeing this, check the names tied to Lane Logistics. That's the weakest point in their chain. He paused. Rebecca, if it's you watching this. I froze. I'm sorry, I didn't tell you, I couldn't. I thought I'd be back before it got ugly, but if I don't come home, don't let this die with me. The screen went black. I didn't realize I was crying until the tears hit my knuckles. David hadn't died in combat. He had vanished chasing the truth, and the people helping to disappear him were using my family's name to do it. I sat in the dark for a long time, breathing in silence. The pieces were aligning, his silence, my father's indifference, the missing reports, the unnamed girl in the wheelchair. David hadn't just vanished, he had been erased. And now I had his voice. Now I had the reason. And if he was still alive, somewhere, I wasn't just chasing hope anymore. I was chasing evidence, and I wouldn't stop either. I watched the second video 4 times. It was tucked away beneath a misnamed cache file, protected by a dual authenticator protocol David had once taught me years ago when we were both just cadets, trying to impress our professors. This one didn't have David speaking into the camera. No warnings, no goodbyes, just raw footage. A private meeting in a concrete room. 4 men and 1 woman, all in civilian clothes. But I knew how to read body language, and these weren't civilians. On the back wall, a whiteboard showed the date, location, Camp Fenwick, an unofficial black site we'd both investigated years ago and had been told was shut down. The video's metadata confirmed the date, just 6 days before David disappeared. There was audio, crystal clear. The cargo will arrive at the Halston checkpoint. Lane Logistics handles the rest, no formal clearance needed. And the operatives? We cycle them through under humanitarian cover. NGO labels. We strip comms before they cross the line. And then, do not release coordinates. We already had a brush with a comms leak last week. If it happens again. I paused the video. In the bottom corner of the frame, a printed briefing packet lay open, just visible enough to reveal a deployment roster. I zoomed in. My stomach twisted. Unit names, call signs, live GPS coordinates. And at the top, printed in red, active, do not duplicate. David had captured a national security breach, a real one. And now it was in my hands. I was sitting on proof of multiple illegal transfers, black site manipulation, and direct misuse of domestic logistics channels for unauthorized operations. But I was also sitting on sensitive, active deployment data. If I leaked the whole thing, I'd take down the entire operation. But I might also get soldiers, innocent ones, killed. I stared at the screen for a long time, jaw clenched, mind racing. I could already hear my father's voice. You've never understood how this world works. You think justice is simple. But justice wasn't what I was after, not entirely. Truth was, and the truth had to protect, more than it exposed. So I opened a secure machine, air-gapped. No remote access. I clipped the video. I blurred the section that revealed coordinates. Then, in a separate report, I detailed every other factual element. Location, participants, language used, timing, anomalies, procurement chain. And I signed it anonymously, not through my station, not through command. I submitted it straight to the Office of the Inspector General with a single line. Flagged as urgent under Title 10. Multiple violations of domestic military distinction. Audit advised immediately. I encrypted the full, unedited copy and stored it offline, because I knew this would come back. Someone would try to trace the leak. But I also knew one more thing. David hadn't just left me a trail. He had trusted I'd know which truths to speak and which to protect. I whispered to the dark room, I've got you. Both the mission and the men in it. The next day I was called in for a routine briefing. Only, there was nothing routine about it. And the man who stepped into the room to question me, I had seen him in that video. I drove through the night to reach her, Sergeant Mariana Perez, 28 years old, wounded in action, listed under temporary civilian observation in a veterans hospital 2 states away. The transfer logs were sealed. I only found her because of a name David had scribbled on the corner of a napkin in his coded folder. M. Perez, watch her back. The receptionist told me she'd been discharged 2 days ago. I asked to see her file. I was told no, so I waited. I parked across the street from the rehab center. For 8 hours. At 6:42 p.m., a wheelchair ramp van pulled up. And there she was, the girl from the ceremony. Her hair was now shaved short. A long scar ran down her neck. The bruises had faded, but the war hadn't left her. I stepped out of the car slowly, hands visible. She recognized me instantly. Her body tensed. You shouldn't be here, she said. I knelt beside her wheelchair. Neither should you. She looked away. They told me not to talk to anyone. Was David one of the people who saved you? I asked gently. She flinched. Her fingers trembled on the armrest. I waited. Let the silence stretch. Finally, she nodded. He pulled me out after a blast, she said. I was bleeding out. He used his own shirt to stop it, told me to hold on. She reached into her coat and slowly unfolded something wrapped in bandage gauze. A torn piece of military-grade map. Waterproof, labeled in grease pencil. Only half of it. And a single word scrawled across the margin. Clearwater. I took it with both hands. My throat tightened. Where's the rest? He kept it, she said. Told me if anything happened to give this to his wife. He said, you were the only one he trusted. Something inside me cracked open. I looked her straight in the eye. Did he say where he was going? number, but he said he wasn't done. And he said he'd be watching the Northern Path, whatever that means. I knew what it meant. Clearwater was an old code name David and I used back in our early intel days for compromised zones that pretended to be clear. False calm. Real threat underneath. If he wrote that word, it wasn't just a location, it was a warning. I folded the half map carefully and placed it in the inner pocket of my jacket. "You're not safe here," I said. "You're the last person who saw him alive, and now I've come looking." "I know," she whispered. "They moved me twice last week without explaining why." "Let me help," she shook her head. "You can't, but if you find him, tell him I didn't forget." I rose to leave, but before I could turn, she gripped my wrist. Her voice was low, urgent. "They think he's dead, Rebecca, but someone's lying. And someone's still looking for him, for the wrong reasons." I froze. "Why?" "Because he has proof that could bring down more than just your father." I looked at her one last time. She was scared. But she hadn't broken, and now I knew no one else was coming for David. If he was alive, if he was hiding, he was waiting for me, and I wouldn't fail him again. I hadn't seen Malik Reeves in 5 years. Not since he walked away from Fort Bragg with a discharge paper in one hand and a shoulder full of shrapnel in the other. We'd served together in SIGINT, Signals Intelligence. Malik was the kind of man who could hear a whisper through a hurricane. The army tried to bury him behind a desk after his injury. He walked out the next day, muttering something about never working for ghosts in uniform again. But I knew he hadn't stopped listening. Not really. He just tuned his frequency elsewhere. I found him in the back of an auto shop in Arlington. Headphones on, knee bouncing, a dozen monitors blinking green and red behind him. When I stepped in, he didn't look up, just said, "I knew it was you the second your tires hit the gravel." Still paranoid, I smiled. "Still stubborn," he replied, swiveling around. "What's the mission, Lane?" I handed him the half map from Sergeant Perez and a printed copy of the last logistics report, the one with my father's company listed. Malik studied them both, then leaned back. "You're opening a door that doesn't close. I think someone's holding David at a site that's not on the official books," I said quietly. "I need to find it before they move him again. Or worse." He cracked his knuckles. "You still remember your login to the Logistics Operations Interface?" "I remember my first password and every classified violation I ever logged." "Let's go." He handed me a keyboard. "Type it in. I'll cover our trail." We tapped into the Army's logistics backbone through an outdated procurement channel. One so dull, no one thought to guard it properly. From there, we filtered through black sites, personnel routing patterns, fuel manifests, and encrypted asset reports. Hours passed. The sun disappeared behind the blinds. Then Malik froze. "Found something. It's buried under a procurement audit folder for spare bolts. But it's encrypted with a CID override. Only Central Intelligence Division can generate those." "Can you break it?" I asked. He gave me a look. "Please." 10 minutes later, the screen flashed. A single line of metadata appeared. Source IP, encrypted node, region, West Africa. Status, active. Timestamp, 6 days ago. There was an attached tag, Camp Sable. The name chilled me. Camp Sable was a rumored detention site, off the record, technically dissolved years ago, located somewhere in the tri-border area where Angola, Namibia, and Zambia brushed up against each other. Most people in the Pentagon wouldn't even say the name out loud. And yet here it was, pinging the logistics system with a fuel requisition code tied to a U.S. auxiliary vendor account. My father's company. "He's there," I whispered. Malik leaned forward. "No one gets out of Camp Sable without someone dying. You know that, right?" I nodded. "That's why I'm not asking for permission." He clicked a few keys and printed a single page with coordinates, timestamps, and a comms frequency. "Then this is your last breadcrumb. Don't contact me again after this. Not until it's over." I took the page and looked him in the eye. "Thank you." "You were always the crazy one," he muttered. "But maybe that's what it takes." I walked out of the garage without looking back. Camp Sable had just gone from ghost story to destination, and if David was there, I was bringing him home, no matter who I had to go through. There was one more name I hadn't crossed off. Nathan Griggs. He used to work as a civilian data integration specialist for Lane Logistics, my father's company. Quiet, smart, the kind of man who kept his head down, his badge clean, and his loyalty flexible. He'd vanished from the company directory 6 months ago, right after the quarter David disappeared. I found him working graveyard shifts in a regional server maintenance center just outside Norfolk. It was the kind of job that didn't require questions or eye contact, perfect for someone who wanted to disappear without leaving the country. I waited outside the building in the early morning haze until he emerged, duffel slung over his shoulder, hoodie pulled tight over his ears. "Mr. Griggs," I called. He froze. Slowly, he turned. His eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," I said, stepping forward. "But you worked for my father. You managed the encrypted transfers for internal communications. I need to ask you something." He laughed once, dry and bitter. "You think I still talk to anyone from that building? After what they did?" I didn't push. I just reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a photo of David. It wasn't an official portrait. It was one I'd taken on a hike, the week before his last deployment. He was laughing, eyes crinkled at the corners, hand mid-reach for my camera. Nathan's face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. He looked down at the photo for a long moment. Then he said very softly, "I told him not to go back." I stepped closer. "You knew?" He glanced around the empty parking lot, then motioned me toward his car. Inside, he shut the door, locked it, and didn't start the engine. "I was asked to scrub all references to Operation Kingswell," he said, voice low. "Not just from the military logistics side, but from internal private contracts, movement manifests, fuel drops, medical supply coding. But David Lane?" He flagged the inconsistencies before the wipe was complete. He sent me a trace packet, told me if anything happened to him, I should keep a copy somewhere off-grid. I held my breath. "Did you?" He reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a small black USB stick. No label, no markings, cold and light in his fingers. "I shouldn't be giving you this," he said, "but when I saw the Pentagon silence your memorial request last year, I knew something was rotten." I took the drive from him carefully. "What's on it?" "Partial packet logs, GPS telemetry, a few ghost entries from an airstrip in Ghana, entries that shouldn't exist. Plus," he hesitated, "a voice file. I didn't listen. I didn't want to know." "Why now?" I asked. He looked out the windshield. "Because I'm tired of pretending ghosts don't leave footprints." As I stepped out of the car, he stopped me with one final warning. "Be careful. Your father isn't the only one who wanted this buried. And if you think you're only up against one man, Rebecca, you're already losing." I nodded, closed the door, and walked away. The USB felt like it weighed 10 pounds in my coat pocket. Later that night, I plugged it into a clean terminal, and what I found confirmed what I feared most. David had uncovered something massive. Something connected to private contractors, foreign interests, and off-book operations buried so deep, even the official logs had been rewritten. But what chilled me most wasn't the data. It was the final audio file. His voice, steady, controlled. "If you're hearing this, I didn't disappear. I was erased, and whoever did it is still in the room. And now, so was I." I filed the report at 2:03 a.m. The USB was encrypted, so I included a transcript of what I'd seen. Redacted enough not to compromise lives, but detailed enough to set off alarms. GPS coordinates, off-book contractors, communication discrepancies between Army Logistics and Lane Logistics Auxiliary Division. A direct connection to Camp Sable. I sent it to the Office of the Inspector General, with a blind copy to the FBI's Military Corruption Task Force. And then I waited. For 42 hours, I heard nothing. Then came the knock. Not on my front door, on my office door, at the War College, where I'd spent the past year lecturing on asymmetric warfare and ethical command structures. Colonel Atkins walked in. He didn't sit. "We've received reports of unsanctioned data transfers initiated under your credentials, Major Lane." I didn't blink. "Then I'm glad they were received." He looked at me, mouth tight. "You've been placed under administrative review, effective immediately. Your access credentials are revoked. Please collect your things and exit the premises by 1600 hours, I could have argued. Thrown my rank around. I didn't. I simply nodded, opened my drawer, and placed my few belongings. Photos of David, a copy of Clausewitz, and a small compass he once gave me, into my bag. No salute, no words. I stepped outside as the wind picked up across the training fields. Cadets were mid-drill. I remembered standing there once myself. Boots new, spine straight. Believing justice was a matter of rank and rules. I smiled bitterly. That had been a long time ago. My mother called that evening, whispering like we were being watched. "Rebecca, what have you done? Your father is furious. He says you're trying to destroy him." I didn't answer, because it wasn't about him. It was about what he helped build, and what it had cost. And yet, even as I sat in my quiet kitchen that night, with a notice of suspension on my inbox and no access to my former network, I didn't feel alone. I felt clear. David once said, "Loyalty is only noble when it's freely given. When it's forced, it becomes complicity." Now I understood. For years, I'd been loyal to an institution that asked me to look the other way. To my family, who used silence as leverage. To a father who weaponized shame and called it leadership. No more. The next morning, I walked into a public affairs office in D.C. and scheduled a meeting with a military reporter I used to brief during my time at CENTCOM. We met in a coffee shop. Neutral ground. I didn't tell him everything. I didn't need to. Just enough to make it impossible to bury. Enough to get Camp Sable on someone's radar. Enough to raise eyebrows at Lane Logistics. "You sure you want this out there?" he asked. "This could get ugly." I looked him in the eye. "It's already ugly. The difference is, now it's visible." As I walked out, the weight of my badge, now deactivated, still pressed into my pocket. They thought suspending me would make me disappear. They didn't realize I'd already been invisible for a year. A widow, a ghost, a problem to be ignored. Now I was a witness. And I wasn't done speaking. I filed the motion under the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act, Section 115. It took 3 weeks, 2 legal consultations, and the last shred of my military reputation to push it through. But eventually I got the hearing, a closed-door session with the Senate Armed Services Committee, attended by selected federal investigators, legal counsel, and military oversight officers. The kind of hearing they don't televise. The kind they think people will forget. They wouldn't forget this one. I wore my service uniform, not out of pride, but to remind them I had worn it with integrity long before my father turned it into a contract. As I entered the hall, the air felt sharper, quieter. At the end of the table sat my father, Colonel Stephen Lane, retired, decorated, untouchable, until today. He didn't look at me, not at first. Just sat there, hands folded over a leather folio, no insignia, just a pale blue tie, and that familiar jaw clenched tight. It was the same expression he wore the day David was declared MIA, the same look he gave at the memorial when I was handed a folded flag, and he muttered that grief was weakness. Now I knew why. I approached the center table and placed 3 folders down, marked copies of the materials I'd submitted, redacted operational logs, contractor shell invoices, Camp Sable movement orders, the original logistics file with Lane Logistics Subdivision listed under civilian support, each one stamped with an internal code, and each one traceable to my father's command chain. They gave me 10 minutes. I didn't need more. I spoke clearly. "Honorable members, I submit that the chain of command overseeing Operation Sabletide was compromised through private logistical channels under the control of Colonel Stephen Lane. The use of auxiliary contracts, falsified accounting, and suppressed recovery missions indicate not only dereliction of duty, but strategic manipulation for personal and political gain." Still, my father didn't flinch, until I looked him in the eye. Colonel Lane was not only aware that my husband, Captain David Lane, was alive after the reported mission failure, he benefited from the cover-up that followed. A sharp intake of breath. Senator Albrecht, presiding, leaned forward. "Captain Lane is alive?" I nodded once. "That's why I'm here." That's when my father finally spoke. His voice was low, but it cut like a rusted blade. "You're my daughter. I didn't think you'd take it this far." I stared at him. "You're right. I am your daughter. But before that, I'm a soldier. And before that, I was David's wife. I buried my career for truth. You buried your soul for control." He smiled faintly, almost admiringly. "So this is your victory." I shook my head. This is the beginning." The room stilled. Papers rustled. A military legal officer requested recess, but I'd said enough. As I stepped out into the hallway, flashbacks rushed in. David's smile under desert light. His voice in that encrypted file. Sergeant Perez's haunted eyes. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was his. It was hers. And it was every soldier who'd ever been written off as inconvenient. I'd always lived in my father's shadow, but today, I became the storm it couldn't contain. They didn't teach us how to fight in a courtroom. In the Army, we were taught terrain, angles, choke points. But in this room, air-conditioned and sterile, there were no high grounds, only procedural objections and chain of custody disputes. I didn't need to win big. I just needed enough. Enough to raise doubt. Enough to shake their silence. Enough to make them say David's name in the present tense again. I started with the map. The half Sergeant Perez had given me was old, creased, stained, annotated in a code only someone like David would use. But it matched a restricted quadrant of Camp Sable, a quadrant that wasn't in any of the official layouts submitted by Joint Logistics. Then came the recording. It was the last thing David ever uploaded to his encrypted drive. His voice cracked in places. He was hiding somewhere, wind in the background, distant echo of aircraft. He spoke fast, like he knew time was limited. "If someone's hearing this," I got close. Too close. Sable isn't just a black site, it's a funnel. Resources go in, people don't come out. I saw shipments rerouted, IDs erased. If I disappear, it's not AWOL, it's not suicide. And it damn sure isn't voluntary. Get this to someone who doesn't owe the colonel anything. My father's name wasn't in the file, but he didn't have to be. The next document was the chain of command list signed 3 months prior to David's disappearance. The logistics transfers, the IP logs pinged from a remote access point in Africa. It painted the outline of a conspiracy and gave enough for someone smarter, someone with power, to color it in. The final exhibit? A time-stamped satellite capture. It showed movement, 6 individuals escorted by armed guards, at the southern edge of Camp Sable, dated 4 weeks after David's reported death. One of them matched his biometric profile within a 92.3% confidence threshold. The courtroom didn't erupt like they do in movies. There was no gasp, no dropped briefcase, just silence. Then a voice, low, uncertain, from one of the Army legal counsels. This implies Captain Lane is still alive." I didn't flinch. "He is. You've all just been looking away long enough to convince yourselves he's not." There were murmurs, a motion to review the evidence in chambers. Deliberations were requested. I sat there, alone at my table, the folders now half empty. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. This wasn't a battlefield, but it required just as much endurance, just as much courage. The only difference. On the battlefield, people bled where you could see it. Here, the wounds were quiet, slow, invisible. I didn't expect an apology from my father. I didn't expect a medal either. All I wanted was movement, legal, tactical, honest. And finally, I got it. They ruled to reopen David's case. His status was changed from KIA to missing presumed detained. That one line, it shifted everything. Because once the door opens, it can't be shut again without someone answering for what's behind it. I wasn't looking for glory. I was looking for truth. And now it was no longer mine alone to carry. The hearing had paused for deliberation. I sat there, still and silent, in that government-issued chair, the folders closed in front of me, nothing else to submit, nothing else to prove, for now. Then the doors opened, not dramatically, not with any announcement, but the atmosphere shifted like a weather front. A woman entered, early 50s, sharp gray suit, UN badge clipped at her collar. I'd seen that insignia before. Humanitarian Coalition Task Force, East Africa Division. She approached the bench, handed a sealed document to the presiding judge, and then turned toward me. "Colonel Rebecca Lane?" she asked. I rose. She gave a slight nod and extended another file. This one marked immediate release, humanitarian debrief. This came through our Nairobi channel less than an hour ago. We were told to deliver it to you, directly. My hands trembled as I took it. Not from nerves, my hands don't shake in public, but from something deeper. A fracture opening under the weight of hope I hadn't allowed myself to carry. I broke the seal. 3 pages, a satellite photo, a typed memo, and a name, David Lane, my brother. Not a memory, not a file. Not a theoretical trace in a black site manifest. Alive. He'd been found. The report read like fiction. An unauthorized militia compound had been breached during a joint humanitarian medical convoy operation in an ungoverned sector of the Sahel. 7 detainees were extracted, some held for months, others for years. One had identified himself weakly as Captain David Lane, U.S. Army. The attending medics didn't recognize the name, but one of the American aid workers, an older man who'd once served at Fort Bragg, did. "Your brother," the woman said gently, "is on a flight to Ramstein right now. He's dehydrated, he's lost weight, but he's lucid. He asked for you by name." I couldn't speak, not at first. The courtroom had gone quiet again, eyes turning toward me like they were waiting for a cue, a next move, a command. But I was no longer a soldier in that moment. I was a sister. I let the weight of it settle. He was alive. And now, everyone knew. The judge tapped the bench. This new information, if verified, supersedes prior presumptions. Captain David Lane's case will be formally reclassified as survivor of unauthorized detention. All connected investigations will remain open and transition to federal oversight. My father didn't speak. He didn't even flinch, just stared ahead, hands clasped like nothing had changed. But it had. The system that protected him had cracked, and the brother he had tried to erase had just become undeniable. I stepped outside that chamber into the sunlit corridor. My body felt like it belonged to someone else, like I had been carrying someone else's armor and could finally lay it down. I didn't cry, not yet, but I did whisper the only words I could find. "Hang on, David. I'm coming." And for the first time in this whole ordeal, it no longer felt like a war I was fighting alone. I arrived at the military medical wing just past midnight. The nurse on duty recognized my clearance and didn't say a word, just handed me a disposable visitor badge and motioned me down the hall. My boots barely made a sound against the polished floor, but my heart was pounding so loudly I felt sure the walls could hear it. Room 417. They'd posted no guards outside, just a handwritten sign. No noise, no sudden light. I pushed open the door gently. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a monitor and the green pulse of a heart rate line. And there he was, David, my brother. Bones sharp against pale skin, hollowed cheeks, lips cracked, hair cropped close by field shears, uneven. A scar across his temple I'd never seen before. His chest rose and fell under the pressure of the ventilator, each breath more machine than man. But he was alive. I stepped closer, afraid I would break the illusion just by moving. I sat beside him, barely breathing. Then his eyelids fluttered. He turned his face slowly toward me. The eye nearest the light opened, just enough. His lips moved, no sound. I leaned closer, and in the quiet through the wires and machines, I heard it. "Mgen Roy." I broke, not outwardly, not with noise, but something cracked down the center of my chest. I reached for his hand. It felt like paper wrapped over splintered wood, but it squeezed. Weak, wavering, but there. "You held on," I whispered. "You stubborn bastard." He tried to smile. It came out more like a twitch, but I knew what it meant. "I got your video," I said. "The one you left hidden. I followed it, all the way." His gaze didn't shift, but tears pooled in his eyes. "I found Sergeant Perez," I added. "She gave me half a map. I got the rest. I gave it to the right people." David closed his eyes, a slow blink of relief. "I know about Dad," I said quietly. "I know what he did, what he buried." No response, just the beeping, just the hiss of the ventilator. Don't worry, I didn't say your name in court. You'll decide when that happens. His fingers tightened slightly around mine. You're safe now, I told him. You're not alone anymore. A pause. Then, so faint I almost missed it, he whispered, "It's not over." I leaned closer. He repeated it, just barely above breath. "It's not over." "What do you mean?" I asked. "You're here. You're safe. What's—" But his eyes rolled slightly, and the nurse entered right on cue. "He's fading," she said gently. "You might have a few more minutes. Let him rest." I nodded. But my mind raced. If he was still afraid, if he thought the danger wasn't over, then we'd only uncovered the first layer. I stayed beside him until dawn broke across the window, until the light touched the white hospital sheets and softened his face. I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid for him now, but because of what he'd said. It's not over, I believed him, and I would find out why, even if it meant going back into the darkness, even if it meant losing everything. Because now I wasn't just his sister, I was his shield, and no one else was getting through. The next morning, David was stronger. He could lift his head slightly, sip water with help. I brought in a small speaker and played a song from our childhood, an old Patsy Cline track he used to hum when we shared bunk beds on base housing in Alaska. He smiled faintly. When the nurse stepped out, I sat closer, and he nodded. "Ready?" he rasped. I nodded. Then he began. "They never wanted me dead, Beck," he said, voice gravelly, deliberate. "They wanted me erased." My throat tightened. "Because of what you found?" David took a shallow breath, then continued. "It started with an audit. I wasn't even looking for it. Just checking discrepancies in fuel shipments. One supplier, ArcLight Allied, remember that name, delivered fuel on 3 continents in 24 hours. Impossible, unless they were teleporting trucks." I frowned. "Ghost trucks," he nodded. "Fake shipments, then fake maintenance invoices, then missing personnel. At first, I thought it was just fraud, skimming off the top. But the deeper I dug, the more it twisted. His hand trembled. I held it steady. "There were 5 logistics corporations," he said. "Not small ones, contracted with the Army, Navy, DoD. They weren't just defrauding. They were using military convoys to move people." My stomach dropped. "Trafficking," he nodded barely. "From war zones, from disaster zones. Displaced people, mostly women and kids. And they laundered them through camps, fake hospitals, even NGOs, all on federal supply chains." I blinked, stunned. "Why didn't you go to the Inspector General?" "I tried," he said bitterly. "Twice. My reports got flagged, disappeared. The moment I included names, the system locked me out." He paused, then looked me straight in the eye. That's when I told Dad. The room went quiet. I didn't breathe. He said he'd take it up the chain, that it was above me now. I believed him, Beck. I thought, just for a moment, he'd help. I felt the heat rise to my face, not from shame, from fury. And instead, David whispered, he reported me as unfit for service. Then, 3 weeks later, I got reassigned to a convoy in Sierra Leone. No unit badge, no extraction plan. I walked straight into a trap. He swallowed, pain clear. They shot the medic beside me, staged the scene, then filed the paperwork. Combat loss, body unrecovered. Just like that, I was dead. "Who was behind it?" I asked, voice tight. David gave a slow blink. "Not just Dad. He was just one piece. He protected the cover, but there were others. Politicians, contractors, foreign liaisons. It's a web, Beck. One tug, and it collapses." I looked at him, this broken version of my brother who had once carried a wounded man 4 miles on his back in Afghanistan, who read spy novels upside down just to test memory, who kept a compass under his pillow even when stationed at sea. "They didn't break you," I whispered. "They tried. But you're here," he smiled faintly. "I'm not done. Neither was I." This wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about exposing the machine that tried to erase him. "I filed my report," I told him. "Redacted names, but the truth is moving." "Good," he said. "But be ready. Once the names come out." "I'll be ready," I said firmly. "This doesn't end in a hospital room. It ends in court." David's voice dropped. "Or in fire." I squeezed his hand, then let it burn. The storm didn't pass just because we were in the same room again. If anything, the air felt heavier now. With every truth David revealed, I could feel the shadows growing behind me, stretching long across corridors I hadn't walked yet. After he slept, I stepped out into the hallway. Military nurses passed with clipped steps. Somewhere down the corridor, a radio played a country song, like it didn't know the world was cracking open. I called Malik first. He didn't answer. I left a coded voicemail. Then I contacted Sergeant Perez. She picked up on the second ring. "He's alive," I said. A silence then. I always knew. "I need your help." Again. She didn't hesitate. "You'll have it." Back in David's room, I opened my notebook. Not the digital files, not the encrypted backups, just paper, pen, what we knew, what we could prove, what was still missing. I sketched a circle and wrote 5 names, 5 corporations David had linked to the trafficking operation. Arclight Allied, Polaris Systems, Calder Logistics, Greystone Bridge, and J-Vector International. Next to them, I wrote a list of senators and defense consultants tied to their boards. It read like a who's who of Washington and Langley insiders. At the center of the web, the phrase Camp Sable, and one thin arrow pointing back to my father. The first battle had been finding David. The next would be dragging the rest of this into the light. I heard the rustle of sheets behind me. David was awake again. "You're mapping it," he said. "Yes," I replied. "We're going to finish this." He tried to sit up. I gently helped him ease against the pillows. His eyes were tired, but the fire was there again. "They'll try to stop it. I'm counting on it." He gave a half laugh. "You were always the, stubborn one." "No," I said, closing the notebook. "I just stopped waiting for someone else to do the right thing." There was a knock on the door. A junior officer entered, nervous, mid-20s, uniform too crisp to have seen real mud. "Ma'am," he said to me, "there's a message from Fort Belvoir. They've requested your presence, tomorrow." I didn't flinch. "What about him?" I asked, nodding toward David. "Medical transfer, Bethesda. They're calling it witness protection, but I think it's something else." I exchanged a look with my brother. "Tell them I'll be there," I said. "But I won't come alone." The officer hesitated, then nodded and left. David looked at me, voice low. "This isn't over." "No," I said, steady. "This is just the calm before it begins again." For a brief moment, we just sat in silence, 2 soldiers who'd once fought on opposite ends of a continent, now preparing for a war buried under protocol and red tape. But this war, it wouldn't be waged with weapons. It would be fought with records, with names, with sworn testimony and classified files finally brought into the sunlight. This time, we wouldn't be fighting to win a medal. We'd be fighting to make sure no one disappeared the way he did. I slipped the notebook into my jacket. One more deep breath. "I'll see you in the fire," I told him. And he nodded, like we were back in the field, already moving to the next target. Because the storm hadn't ended, we had just become the eye of it. The lights were too bright, the room too polished. Rows of microphones lined the table in front of me, and I could see the red dots of cameras blinking like warning signs across the courtroom. The seal of the United States glinted behind the dais, where the Oversight Committee sat, half stone-faced, half performative. This wasn't justice. It was theater. David was still recovering, lungs weak, body frail, so I stood alone. But I wasn't silent. "I am Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Lane," I said into the mic, my voice clear, even. "And I am here because no one else would be." Murmurs stirred among the press. I saw my father's defense counsel frown in the second row. They told me I was too emotional to command, too reactive, too soft, I continued. But it wasn't logic that kept me searching when the files were redacted. It wasn't protocol that made me listen when others walked away. It was my emotion, my grief, my loyalty. I held up the flash drive Malik decrypted. "This is a partial list of movements and contracts approved under false cover. Routes used for non-military cargo. Names of individuals paid to look the other way. This system wasn't broken. It was built this way." One of the congressmen leaned in. "Commander Lane, are you accusing military contractors of human trafficking under DoD contracts?" I didn't blink. "No, sir, I'm not accusing. I'm reporting. With evidence. that your offices received twice and buried. That landed harder than I expected. One staffer's pen froze mid-scribble. I inhaled, held, released. When my brother, Staff Sergeant David Lane, uncovered internal memos linking logistics companies to unauthorized detainment sites, his deployment status was accidentally changed. His location was scrubbed. I found a death certificate filed 6 weeks later. I saw gasps, even from the hardened reporters, but I wasn't finished. For 2 years, I was told I was chasing shadows, being dramatic, seeing what I wanted to see. I looked into the camera. To every woman who has been told she's overreacting, this is what too emotional looks like. I paused. It looks like refusing to walk away when the paper trail is buried. It looks like listening to survivors when command says it's not your concern. It looks like walking into this room when it would have been safer to stay silent. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply let the weight settle. Camp Sable was not a rogue operation. It was a pattern. And my father's company, Lane Logistics Auxiliary Division, supplied 2 of the drop routes used in its covert expansion. I laid out a map, simple, undeniable. "Mr. Chairman," I said, "I'm not just here as a soldier or a sister. I'm here as a witness to what happens when loyalty is manipulated, when honor is used as a mask." A woman in uniform seated beside a 3-star general whispered something. He didn't reply. His eyes were on me. Unblinking. I closed my folder. "I don't need to be believed," I said in finality. "I just need the record to be public." The chairman cleared his throat. "This committee will recess for review and reconvene at—" I didn't stay for the end of the sentence. As I walked out, flashes from the press lit the marble halls. I didn't stop, didn't pose, didn't smile. I had stood alone, but I hadn't stood in vain. And this time, they couldn't say they didn't know. The room fell quiet before I even touched the play button. I could feel it, the kind of silence that pulls at your throat before a funeral hymn. The oversight committee had reconvened after lunch. Their ties were straighter, faces tighter. Maybe they thought the worst had already been said. They were wrong. "I have one more submission for the record," I said calmly, placing the small portable recorder on the desk in front of the microphone. This was recovered from a hard drive found at a decommissioned logistics node linked to Camp Sable. It contains audio from an unauthorized interrogation. The voice you'll hear, being questioned, is that of my brother. A few heads turned. A few brows lifted. I pressed play, at first only static. Then, David's voice, barely audible. "I already filed the report." "You're too late." Then a low voice, smooth, professional, unhurried. "Male. You filed. It encrypted. But we intercepted the chain. No one knows you're here, so let's talk again, Sergeant." The quality was grainy, but the fear was sharp. In David's voice, in his breaths, you could hear a struggle, not with violence, but with the certainty that the world had gone dark on purpose. There were more voices, 3 others. One gave orders, one asked questions. One just laughed under his breath. They named names. Not full ones, just call signs and titles. Colonel Hastings said he doesn't want blowback. The contract came through Ryder Holdings, per usual. Lane said he'll clean it up, like last time. Someone in the back gasped. Whether it was at the mention of my father's name or the dead certainty in the interrogator's voice, I didn't look. The playback continued. David refused to give names. They threatened to mark him as hostile. One man muttered about making it look like a rebel hit. And then, nothing. Just silence for 11 seconds. That was the part that hit hardest. The nothing. When the audio clicked off, no one moved. I looked around. One senator had his hand over his mouth. A staffer blinked too fast to be casual. Another woman, a civilian consultant for the Department of Defense, had tears pooling but didn't wipe them away. Then, softly but unmistakably, Senator Eleanor Wren, from Georgia, whispered, "Oh my God." She didn't look at anyone. She just whispered it like a prayer she never meant to say out loud. I leaned into the mic. My voice didn't shake. That recording is 3 years old. The voices have been identified by independent linguists and cross-referenced with deployment rosters. I've submitted the metadata. We verified it. And my brother's voice print matched. I paused. Let the weight fall. What you just heard was never meant to survive. It survived because David believed someone, anyone, would listen. Not believe. Just listen. The chairman cleared his throat, but no words followed. I'm not here for vengeance, I added. I'm here for accountability, for those still in uniform, for those still in chains. The reporter from The Atlantic dropped her pen. I heard it clatter. Still no one spoke. I gathered the documents, the flash drive, the empty water bottle. I looked straight at the row where my father had sat that morning. His seat was now empty. I told you, I said, more to myself than anyone. They don't get to erase him. And I walked out, into a silence far louder than applause. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat on the floor of my apartment, cross-legged, still in my hearing outfit. Navy blazer, tan slacks, my mother's watch around my wrist. The old laptop hummed beside me, screen glowing with cascading headlines. CNN, Fox News, Al Jazeera, BBC, Reuters, NPR. Even The Guardian had picked it up. Breaking, Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Lane exposes Black Flag Network inside military logistics chain. U.S. officer uncovers human trafficking tied to defense contractors. Rebecca Lane and the secrets they buried. Every hour, another outlet joined the storm. By 2 a.m., Rebecca Lane was trending in over 30 countries. By dawn, major networks were rerunning clips of my testimony, side by side with archival footage of David, and still images of Camp Sable. Fox News had a banner, Whistleblower or Patriot, the woman behind the wire. CNN called it, From Loyalty to Law, a Soldier's Stand. But what moved me most weren't the headlines. It was the messages that poured in. A retired Army nurse from Mississippi wrote, I served 28 years. I always knew there were shadows in the system. Thank you for turning on a light. A mother from Nevada whose son went missing on deployment messaged, They told us he went rogue. Now I wonder if he just saw too much. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for standing up. And then, an anonymous comment, buried on a quiet military forum. I knew David. I thought he was dead. She brought him back. They owe her everything. I scrolled and scrolled. The faces I'd seen across hearings and base halls suddenly had voices. Thousands of them. Contractors, veterans, family members, even current service members using throwaway accounts. Some cried, some raged, some asked how they could help. A radio station in San Diego read excerpts of my statement live, uninterrupted. A former Navy JAG on MSNBC said, This could be the most explosive testimony involving private military contractors in the last 20 years. By morning, an emergency oversight panel had been scheduled. DOJ issued a preliminary inquiry into all 5 corporations named in David's original encrypted report. The Secretary of the Army issued a one-line statement. We take these allegations seriously and will act accordingly. I knew that tone. It meant they were cornered and watching carefully. But amidst the chaos, something else happened, something quiet. A girl, maybe 16, sent me a video. She sat on her front porch, wearing a faded ROTC shirt. She said, They always said I was too soft to serve. But today, I watched you speak. And I realized maybe they were wrong. Maybe feeling something isn't weakness. Her voice cracked. She smiled anyway. Thank you, Commander. That broke me, not because I was proud, but because I understood exactly how that felt. The media frenzy wasn't about me, not really. It was about the people who'd waited years to be heard. People like that girl, like Sergeant Perez, like David. Like the families still waiting for a phone call that never came. The networks had their headlines, but the real headline? We were no longer ghosts in the machine. We had names, stories, and finally, someone had listened. My father was sentenced to 17 years in federal prison. There was no applause in the courtroom, no cameras, no catharsis, just the low hum of the air vents and the sound of the judge's gavel echoing against marble in history. He stood still as the sentence was read, not defiant, not remorseful, just still. Like he had been expecting it for decades. Like he'd prepared for this moment not with lawyers, but with armor made of pride and silence. When they asked if he had anything to say, he shook his head. I didn't speak either. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. They wanted a soundbite, a headline, something fiery. I gave them only this: justice is not about vengeance, it's about accountability. Then I walked past them. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel anything, really. Not hate, not glee, not even relief. Just a kind of calm, like exhaling after holding your breath too long underwater. I knew what my father had done. I knew he'd hurt people, betrayed his oath, buried truth beneath rank and reputation. And I knew he had tried, until the very end, to keep control of the story. But that day, he didn't get the final word. I did. For years, my father manipulated systems and people to serve a version of order that benefited him. He once told me, when I was a cadet, "Structure wins wars, not emotion. Leave your softness at the door." But it wasn't emotion that had undone him. It was evidence. It was tenacity. It was the daughter he taught to stand straight, but never imagined would stand against him. That night, I visited the small grave marker at Arlington, not David's, because he was alive, but of my mother. She died when I was 17. He rarely spoke of her after, like mourning was inefficient. I knelt at her stone, whispered, "I'm sorry it took so long. But he can't hurt us anymore." The wind didn't answer, but I felt the silence shift. At home, I found the box my father once gave me when I graduated officer candidate school. Inside, his medal, a handwritten quote from Eisenhower, and a note, "Lead quietly, but lead." I stared at the handwriting for a long time, then I lit a match. I didn't burn the medal. That wasn't mine to destroy, but I burned the note, because I no longer needed his permission to lead. The system would take time to fix. Black Flag's contractors were under investigation. Others had stepped forward. Testimonies were multiplying. Some wanted to call it the lane reform, but I asked them not to. This wasn't about me. It never was. Justice didn't mean every wrong was righted. It meant I chose truth when silence would have been easier. It meant David could sleep without chains. It meant my father's power no longer dictated my compass. They took his uniform, but I took back my voice. And that, to me, was the only sentence that ever mattered. A month later, an envelope arrived by certified mail. It was thick, formal, sealed in navy wax. David opened it with a quiet breath and passed it to me. Inside were 2 citations, signed by the Secretary of Defense. We were each awarded the Distinguished Service Medal. The words were precise, bureaucratic, heavy with the weight of war and silence. For exceptional conduct in the exposure of unlawful operations endangering American military personnel and civilians. For courage under institutional pressure and upholding the values of the United States Armed Forces. There was an invitation too, a ceremony at the Pentagon, full dress, televised, commendations to be pinned by a 4-star general. David looked at me, expression unreadable. Then he said, "Do you want to go?" I thought about it. About the standing ovation, the flashbulbs, the quiet murmur of names reclaimed and reputations restored. And then I shook my head. "No," I said. "We've already done the hardest part." He nodded once, and that was the end of it. The day of the ceremony, we stayed home. It was a warm afternoon in Virginia, the kind where the light feels like honey and the breeze carries the soft hush of seasons changing. David sat in the wooden chair I'd repainted months ago, before I knew he was alive. Before everything. He was still healing. His lungs were weak, his hands occasionally trembled, but he was here. I brewed 2 cups of tea. He brought the blanket. We sat on the porch beneath the white pergola he'd built years ago, when things were simpler. The white chrysanthemums I planted during deployment leave bloomed behind us, fragile but defiant. We didn't speak much. We didn't have to. A small TV inside played the ceremony. We heard our names read aloud, our citations recited with solemnity. Applause followed. My face never appeared. Neither did his. The screen showed 2 empty seats in the front row. Someone whispered that we must have missed our flight. But the truth is, we didn't miss anything. We just didn't need it. Honor isn't always found under stage lights. Sometimes it lives in silence, in choosing peace over pride, in saying, "We did what we came to do. Now we rest." I reached over and took David's hand. He looked at me, really looked at me, and his eyes were clear, steady, whole. The kind of gaze that tells you the worst is over, even if the world is still cracked around the edges. "They can keep the medals," he said softly. I smiled. We kept each other. That night, the wind picked up. I brought the chrysanthemums inside so they wouldn't topple. One petal fell to the floor, ivory white, thin as memory. I placed it in the drawer beside my old ID badge, the one that said, Rebecca Lane, Military Logistics Division. I don't wear that badge anymore, but I'll never forget what it cost to carry it, and what it gave me back. David was sleeping, finally. His breathing had steadied into a soft rhythm, the rise and fall of someone no longer on alert. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a long moment, just watching. His hand rested over the blanket, twitching now and then, a leftover from all the nights he flinched in dreams. But tonight he looked younger, or maybe just unburdened. I wrapped the shawl tighter around my shoulders and stepped outside onto the porch. The white chrysanthemums still held their shape under the moonlight. The air was cooler now, early autumn brushing through the trees. Insects hummed somewhere in the dark, not loud, just present enough to remind me that the world kept spinning. Above me, the sky was open and endless. I used to stare at the stars as a child, thinking I'd find answers up there, some divine pattern that explained why people hurt each other, why silence was louder than truth, why love sometimes had to take the longer road. Tonight, I didn't need answers. Tonight, I was just grateful. Grateful that David came home, not whole, but alive. Grateful that my voice had cracked through the machine. Grateful that somewhere, a girl like me might see what we did and know she doesn't have to break to make change. For the first time in years, no one was telling me to move on, and I realized I never stopped moving. I just finally chose the right direction. Inside, the kettle whistled. I poured 2 mugs of tea, set one by his side, just in case he woke. I returned to the porch with mine and sat, barefoot, feeling the old wood creak under me like an old friend, the kind that doesn't demand anything except that you show up. And I did. I was here. Before we say goodbye, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this are the only thing that makes sense? Let me know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. If this story meant something to you, even just a line, a moment, a breath, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in something gentle, something brave, something kind. Because that's what this has been about all along. Not revenge, not exposure, but restoration. The slow, quiet rebuilding of what was stolen. Dignity, truth, and the right to be seen. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care of yourself. We'll see you in the next story.